Thank you, colleagues. We move to Group 13. Actually, before we move to Group 13, members will note that we'll shortly reach the next time limit, and we still have 2 more groups to debate. As a consequence, under Rule 9.8.5a, I'm minded to accept a motion without notice to propose that the time limit be extended by 30 minutes. I invite the Minister for Parliamentary Business to move such a motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And the question is that the time limit for debate on amendments be extended by 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, and I call Amendment 108 in the name of Sue Webber, grouped with Amendments 236, 109 and 237. Sue Webber to move Amendment 108 and speak to other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The bill currently before us contains a profound and dangerous omission. It is silent on what should happen if the lethal substance fails to end a person's life. Subsection 3 offers immunity to those assisting a person in an attempt to end their own life in accordance with the Act, but it provides no guidance on the limits of that protection. If a first attempt does not succeed, the law is entirely unclear. Can a doctor intervene further without risk of criminal liability, or is any subsequent action potentially prosecutable? This gap is not minor. It leaves both patients and healthcare professionals in legal and ethical uncertainty. So my amendments 108 and 109 attempt to address this ambiguity by specifying the boundaries of lawful protection. The proposed subsection 3A clarifies that subsection 3 applies only to assistance connected to the person's original lawful request. It explicitly excludes protection for any actions taken to complete a death once the initial attempt has begun. In other words, it draws a line between lawful assistance and further intervention beyond the original request. Even with these amendments, the very need for such clarification highlights that serious flaw in the bill itself. The original text fails to define the scope of immunity clearly, leaving a potentially catastrophic gap. Doctors and carers could be left uncertain about their legal position in a situation where a patient survives an initial attempt. Patients themselves may be exposed to risk because the law offers no roadmap for managing a failed attempt. This is a glaring example of how the bill, as drafted, is bad law. Legal protections must be precise, predictable and complete, especially in legislation authorising assistance in ending life. The fact that these amendments are necessary at all underscores the bill's fundamental weakness. Rather than offering a coherent, safe and accountable framework, the bill leaves critical questions unanswered, creating both legal ambiguity and practical danger. On this measure, the bill fails. It does not provide clarity, it does not protect professionals, and, more importantly, it does not safeguard patients. Its silence on failed attempts exposes an unacceptable serious flaw. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 236 and also to Amendment 237 in the name of Fergus Ewing and other amendments in the group.
Presiding Officer, I will present these remarks as 2 distinct sets of remarks, because one is offered on behalf of Fergus Ewing, who cannot be here. But before I do that, I just want to take a few seconds to thank colleagues for the way in which our proceedings have been conducted today. And I'm very grateful for the respectful way in which we're being able to present views that we feel very passionately about. And I think that is really good. And I especially want to thank Edward Mountain and Bob Doris and Daniel Johnson for their very personal accounts in the last group of amendments. And we've all got our personal stories to bring to this bill, and I'm grateful to those who are sharing. Group 13 brings us to this most important legal boundary in the entire bill, and I think Sue Webber's right to point out that there is a fudging of the line here, which we need to clarify, the line between lawful assistance and the direct causing of another person's death. Amendment 236 my name, is intended to make that boundary clear. It doesn't change the overall purpose of the bill. What it does is ensure that the limits of the law are understood by clinicians, by families and by the public. And at the heart of this amendment is a simple principle. While the bill permits assistance to a terminally ill adult who has chosen that path, nothing in it should authorise an act in which another person directly causes that individual's death. And that distinction matters. Across other countries where similar laws exist, the question has often arisen about where the boundary lies between assisted dying and euthanasia. They are not the same thing. Assisted dying involves a person carrying out the final act themselves. Euthanasia involves another person administering the means of death. And the Fifth Parliament is to legislate in this area at all, that boundary must be unmistakably clear. And I would say currently it is not. Now, Amendment 236 therefore sets out that plainly. It confirms that nothing in the Act permits any person to carry out an act that directly causes another person's death. It defines assistance narrowly, limiting it to the preparatory or facilitated actions. And it makes clear that if someone administers a substance, operates a device, performs the act that directly brings about death, that conduct remains subject to criminal law. And this matters not only for legal clarity, but for public confidence. Doctors who may find themselves working within this framework must know exactly where the legal boundary lies. It's our duty to make that clear. Families must understand what the law permits and what it does not. Again, it is our duty in this chamber to make that clear. And the public must be confident that Parliament has not created a pathway that quietly shifts from assistance to the direct administration of death. Again, it's incumbent on us to make this clear. Assistance must never quietly become something more. And this amendment helps ensure that the distinction remains clear and firmly anchored in law. It protects vulnerable individuals by making it clear that the final act cannot be transferred to another person. It also protects medical professionals. No doctor should ever be left uncertain about whether a particular action crosses the line into conduct that the criminal law still prohibits. And members across the chamber will approach the wider question of assisted dying from different convictions. And as I've said before today, I respect that. But whatever view we take on the principle, we should at least agree that the law we pass must be clear, careful and precise. And Amendment 236 provides that clarity. It ensures that assistance does not become something else. It keeps the legal boundary where Parliament intends it to be, and it helps ensure that the law we pass today does not leave confusion for those who must live with its consequences tomorrow. And for legislation of this gravity, that clarity is not excessive, it's essential. Now I turn to Amendment 237 in the name of Fergus Ewing. And as before, these are Fergus Ewing's remarks. Presiding Officer, this amendment seeks to provide greater clarity around the meaning of lawful assistance within the bill. It would ensure that those involved in the assisted dying process, particularly medical practitioners, carers and others who may support an individual, have a clear understanding of the boundaries of lawful behaviour. The amendment defines lawful assistance as assistance provided in full compliance with all provisions of the Act. This includes adherence to the procedural steps required for making declarations and assessments under Sections 6 to 8. It also incorporates the reporting and record-keeping duties set out elsewhere in the legislation, ensuring that actions are supported by transparent documentation. In addition, the amendment recognises the role of guidance issued by the Scottish ministers. By explicitly including such guidance within the definition, it ensures that lawful assistance must align not only to the letter of the Act, but also the administrative and practical expectations that accompany its implementation. Presiding Officer, this amendment will play a vital role in preventing individuals from inadvertently falling outside the law due to misunderstanding and should be supported by members right across this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now call Stuart McMillan.
Oh, sorry, Presiding Officer, that's been an accident.
Thank you, Mr McMillan. I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has no comment on any of the amendments in this group.
Thank you. I call Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And again, I start by thanking Sue Webber and Stephen Kerr for setting out the rationale for the amendments. Sue Webber's amendments 108 and 109 seek to provide that it is a crime and also gives rise to civil liability to assist someone to end their life after the point at which someone has been provided with the substance and has not died as a consequence. The bill as drafted makes it absolutely clear that only the actions specified in the bill with regard to assisting a terminally ill adult to end their own life will be lawful. The bill is also clear that the final act to bring about death must be taken by the person themselves, or the management of complications remains subject to standard clinical practice. What's not clear is how the requirements in these amendments would interact with the doctor or nurse providing care and taking steps to make the person comfortable. And as such, I can't support Amendments 108 and 109. Yes, Stephen Kerr, yes.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to Liam MacArthur for giving way, because we had an exchange sometime in the last couple of days about this phrase of making them comfortable. And I'm still not clear, frankly, what that might mean. But I'm going to ask him to test an assumption that I'm making about what he's saying. Is he saying in that situation where someone has taken a substance and it doesn't work, and that they are clearly in distress, that he would expect the healthcare professionals there to fulfil their traditional role in helping that person overcome that distress, and where it's practical to make a recovery from the effects of the substance they've taken, as opposed to what we're trying to do with these amendments, which is to create a clear legal boundary between the assistance that's prescribed in his bill to someone who has requested and has received approval to get have an assisted death, compared with euthanasia, where their involvement in that situation might lead to the person's death. That's the point of clarity that we are seeking in this group. I wonder if he'd comment about the assumptions I've made in describing the scenario that I've tried to describe as sensitively as I can.
Liam MacArthur.
Yes, and I think we are going back over the discussion we had. I think it was last night, but I certainly understand why we are all losing a sense of time at this stage. But I think, as I said earlier, ensuring that clinicians are responding to those instances in an appropriate way, relevant to the training that they have. And also, I think, back to perhaps some of the discussions we had around the advanced care directives, ensuring that patients are advanced care planning, ensuring the discussions that are happening around the time where medical professionals are talking about the options that are available to them. Once they're certain that they wish to proceed with an assisted death, the medications, the process that will happen, the effect that this will have, results in an informed discussion that the patient is having with the medic. So any concerns that they have, any questions that they have an opportunity to be aired and discussed with the medical professional. I'll take Sue Webber.
Yeah,
Sue Webber.
Yeah, thank you, Mr MacArthur. Maybe you can help me understand that when you're talking about that informed discussion between the healthcare professional and the patient seeking the assisted death, are you suggesting that there is a conversation between those people to say that, should I take the substance and it doesn't kill me, that I now want you to make sure my life ends?
Liam MacArthur.
It will be, in the sense, the response I gave to the questions that were being posed yesterday, the answer remains the same. It will be up to the judgment of the clinician to use the professional skills and experience that they have in order to make the patient comfortable. It is not open to the medical professional to think, which is I think where Sue Webber is trying to direct the discussion, into essentially euthanising the patient. So what I'm saying is that there is standard practice at the moment for medical professionals to use their judgment in situations that relieve suffering and make the patient comfortable, that essentially palliate the patient. And that is what would occur in this situation. For the same reasons, I don't support Stephen Kerr's Amendment 236, which seeks to avoid doubt, which I don't think legally exists, and to clarify areas which I don't believe require further clarification. The bill is absolutely explicit, as I said, in making clear that the actions specified in the bill with regard to assisted a terminally ill adult to end their own life will be lawful. And the bill also is clear that the final act to bring about death must be taken by the person themselves. Meanwhile, Fergus Ewing's Amendment 237 seeks to clarify and reiterate provisions already contained in the bill and the law in Scotland as it stands. While I understand the intent behind 237, further detail will be set out in guidance produced by the GMC, Scottish ministers and others. And taken together, these mechanisms should provide sufficient clarity for practitioners. Adding a further provision potentially creates a backdrop for medical practitioners who may then be concerned about the potential for civil litigation arising for minor record-keeping issues or questions about how particular guidance has been followed. And as such, I can't support Amendment 237.
Thank you. And I call Sue Webber to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 108.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. If you just let me get this little folder here, sorry. I think we've heard in this group that the issue does go to heart of both the legal framework surrounding the bill and, frankly, the fundamental mental principles that underpin our criminal law. In any other circumstance, taking a person's life is a crime. Enabling a suicide or assisting a suicide is also a crime. And right now our laws rightly contain strong protections to prevent anyone from encouraging, facilitating or enabling another person's death. And those safeguards exist to protect the vulnerable and to ensure the law remains firm on the side of preserving life. And Stephen Kerr's amendments have been seeking to really reinforce the importance of those legal boundaries, and also Fergus Ewing's in terms of that lawful assistance, making sure that there is a clear understanding of what lawful behaviour is and the practical expectations that are in law. And when we've challenged Mr MacArthur there when he stated provide care and taking steps to make the patient comfortable, and what happens when the substance doesn't work, I don't think we've had the clarity from the member today. And that's where my amendments and the other amendments in the group. Yes, I will, Mr MacArthur.
Liam MacArthur.
I'm very grateful to Sue Webber. I mean, it might be helpful if I refer Sue Webber and the Chamber to the reference in section 15(3)(a), which says, for the avoidance of doubt, nothing in this section authorises any person to administer an approved substance to the adult on their behalf with the intention of bringing about the adult's death. It is perfectly clear what the situation is under the bill as it stands. And murder would remain murder whether this bill passes.
Sue Webber.
I'm sorry, but I don't accept that. We've asked you today, Mr MacArthur, and yesterday and last night, and again at stage 2, what happens and what should a healthcare professional do if an individual takes a substance and it does not lead to their death? Do they then do what is, I think it was, traditional role, I think that was it, and intervene to save their life? Or do they or take steps that would lead to that patient's death? That's what we've been seeking. And I think where the clarity to this is in the amendments that we've presented today, because the provisions that we're considering demonstrate that the bill right now falls short of that. And without the amendments that we have in this group, it is deeply silent on these serious scenarios that we've outlined. And what if that lethal substance does not end a person's life? I will, Mr Kerr.
Stephen Kerr.
I tried to elicit a definitive answer from the member in charge, and my concern is that the very fact that we continue to have this discussion because we're not clear about what the answer to the conundrum, and it's a very serious moral conundrum, that I don't particularly want to put doctors, healthcare professionals into, where they can't, where it's not clear exactly what they should do in a situation where the substance that the individual's taken hasn't worked. Does she agree that the bill badly needs that clarity, or at least we should ask the member in charge to be much more specific about what he would expect the medical professionals to do beyond the form of words that I know he's been very careful to use, and I respect the fact that he's been very careful in his choice of words, but I think we need some expansion on what the meaning is.
Indeed, Mr Kerr, because I believe that the original text fails to define the scope of immunity with the precision that legislation of this gravity demands, and without clarity, doctors and carers could find themselves unsure of their legal position if a patient survives an initial attempt. Yes, Mr Mountain, I will.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I thank the member for giving way. What I'm trying to get round in my brain is we voted for an earlier amendment, Presiding Officer, which meant the medical professional has to sit with the patient until the patient has died. I'm still not clear in my mind, if things don't work out as had been anticipated by taking the drugs, and that can happen for a variety of reasons, what that person is supposed to do. Are they supposed to sit there on their hands and do nothing and see if the drugs work and let that person go through the most appalling pain and suffering? Or are they supposed to do something? No one's given me the answer, and I'm not sure if the member knows the answer or whether she feels I've missed something, Presiding Officer, when I've been listening.
Thank you, Mr. Webber. I don't feel I know the answer myself, but what I am trying to do with the amendments in this group is to make sure that patients and healthcare professionals facing this profound and legal and ethical uncertainty at what would be an extraordinary difficult moment for everyone have a clear line that they know their actions will be legal and illegal. And because families must also understand what the law permits. And assistance, as Mr Kerr said, must not or ever become anything more than assistance, because patients could be placed at risk as well, because the law is offering no clear framework for how such a situation could and should be handled, and that's not how serious legislation should operate. So the group highlights that wider concern, and I'm there to try and present a series of amendments alongside my colleagues that will remove that legal ambiguity and provide certainty for doctors, carers, patients and families. Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move my amendment.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 108 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 108 in the name of Sue Webber is yes 47, no 69. There were 4 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 236 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 108. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 236 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 236 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 49, no 69. There were 4 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 109 in the name of Sue Webber, already debated with amendment 108. Sue Webber to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 109 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Russell Finlay for a point of order.
Voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Finlay. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 109 in the name of Sue Webber is yes 31, no 73. There were 16 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 237 in the name of Fergus Ewing, already debated with amendment 108. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 237 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 237 in the name of Fergus Ewing is yes 20, no 96. There were 6 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 110 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 90. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 110 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 110 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes, 103. No, 7. There were 11 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 111 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 90. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 111 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 111 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes, 102, no, 7. There were 12 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 238 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 3. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Not move.
Thank you. I call Amendment 239 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 3. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Not move.
Thank you. And we move on to Group 14, Administration, Regulation and Oversight of Assisted Dying Services. I call Amendment 240 in the name of Jackie Bailey, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Jackie Bailey to move Amendment 240 and speak to other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I want to specifically speak to Amendments 240, 241, 48, 66 and 69 in my name, and then I'll come on to address others. In the case of Amendment 240 and 241, the intention is to provide regulations that specify any settings or services where assistance must not be provided. Amendment 48 simply updates terminology, replacing reference to the Care Inspectorate with Social Care and Social Work Improvement Scotland. Amendments 66 and 69 are also technical amendments, and they're about setting appropriate regulation-making powers for ministers under Section 20A1. 66 advises negative procedure, 69 would be affirmative procedure, sensible amendments all that update the legislation. Let me touch on the other amendments in the group briefly. Fulton McGregor's 250 and 309 talks about one service in each health board area providing assisted dying. That clearly has financial implications, and I'm not sure whether these have been adequately considered. Equally, Daniel Johnson in 292 and 311 talks about the Office of Assisted Dying Register. being created. Miles Briggs in 293 wants an assisted dying review panel, and Liam MacArthur in 72, 73 and 74 makes provision for setting up an assisted dying service. All four colleagues are essentially legislating in a similar area, and I would question whether there is duplication in supporting all of these amendments. I think we would look quite silly, Presiding Officer, if we did so. However, I would leave colleagues to set out their views. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Fulton McGregor to speak to Amendment 250 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm asking colleagues today across the Chamber to support my Amendment 250 and consequential Amendment 309. That would ensure any assisted dying provision in Scotland is delivered through a dedicated specialised service rather than through general practice. And I hear Jackie Bailey's point there, and it is similar to other amendments. I believe this amendment is necessary to ensure any system we create here is safe, informed and compassionate as possible. My amendment seeks to answer the question, if such a service is introduced, how should it be delivered? We must recognise the reality facing general practice today. GPs, as we know, across the country are already operating under pressure. Asking general practice to absorb an entirely new, complex and emotionally demanding clinical responsibility risks placing further strain on the system. More importantly, a briefing from the Royal College of General Practitioners suggests that many GPs would not feel able to participate in assisted dying. Engagement with the profession indicates that a significant proportion of GPs would choose not to take part, whether for ethical, professional or personal reasons. That is entirely understandable, but it also means that expecting assisted dying to operate through patients' own GPs would be neither practical nor equitable. In some communities, particularly perhaps in rural or less populated areas, it's entirely possible that many local GPs may opt out, and this could result in a postcode lottery, where access to a lawful service depends on where a person happens to live. And my amendment introduces a dedicated service which would avoid that risk. Jeremy Balfour.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank Mr McGregor for taking the intervention? I am sympathetic to what he is saying, but I'm just wondering, I'll maybe ask the same question to the other members with amendments, is what will this cost? Has he got any idea of the costing for this? And has he had any discussions with the Cabinet Secretary for Health or with Finance to work out, is this an affordable thing that we can afford here in Scotland?
Fulton McGregor.
I thank Jeremy Balfour for that intervention. I will come back to the costing issues. I won't be able to answer all of the questions he's given me there today, but I'll come back to it, and perhaps some of that will be able to answer what he's asking for. Yeah, okay.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to Mr McGregor for taking the intervention. I am sympathetic to this amendment because I think it would ensure a level of equity of access across the country, but the rationale he's outlined for it doesn't, to me, tally with the effect of the amendment. His rationale seems to be that this would mean that it is not provided by GPs. It's an entirely separate service. My reading of it is that Scottish ministers could set out regulations that say each health board must provide it, but essentially that specialist service could be a system that GPs opt into, particularly in those rural areas that he mentions, where the GP might be the only healthcare provider in that area. They would be the appropriate person to opt in, and essentially the specialist service could be the health board maintaining a list of GPs in their area for people to be referred on to. What he seems to be outlining is that this amendment would mean that GPs could not provide the service. It could only be provided by something separate and specialist. I'm not sure that's the effect of the amendment. Could you clarify that?
Fulton McGregor.
Perhaps as I go on a bit, I'll be able to clarify that a bit more, because that's not what I'm saying. By creating a specialised opt-in service, we allow clinicians who feel able and willing to participate to develop the expertise, training and professional resilience required for this sensitive work. So that answers Ross Greer's question there. They can opt into it. Concentrating the experience in this way ensures that patients are supported by professionals who are confident, well prepared and equipped to manage the clinical and ethical complexity involved. It is important to emphasise that a specialised service does not mean creating something outside the NHS, nor does it necessarily require new buildings or separate facilities. Such services could, and in my opinion should, be community-based, close to home or delivered in a patient's own home. What distinguishes the service is not the building it sits in, but the dedicated teams who provide it. Those teams could bring together a multidisciplinary group of professionals capable of supporting the whole person, their needs, their physical needs, their emotional and psychological well-being, their social circumstances and the needs of their family. Because the reality is that any potential assisted dying provision would be a deeply human process that affects patients, loved ones and professionals alike. Families may require support before the process, during it and afterwards through bereavement. Patients need time to explore their choices, their fears and their circumstances, and that level of care requires coordination, continuity and expertise, and a specialised service allows for exactly that. It would enable dedicated teams to support patients through the entirety of their journey, ensuring consistency, trust and a continuity of care. At the same time, a patient's own GP could continue to provide all other aspects of care, ensuring that their existing relationship with primary care remains intact. Such a model would also protect the workforce. The emotional weight and time commitment associated with assisted dying must not be underestimated. A dedicated service allows for protected time, mandatory training and appropriate psychological support for the professionals involved. And this is far more difficult to guarantee if the responsibility is dispersed across thousands of GP practices. And I think such a set-up would go a long way to addressing many of the concerns that members have shared over the last couple of days in here, and I won't go over all of them again, but some of them could be addressed by a single service. There's also the question of expertise. Based on current estimates, I think it has been highlighted already, most GPs would only very rarely encounter an assisted dying request. This makes it extremely difficult to build the experience and confidence needed to navigate such a complex process. In healthcare, in this chamber, we regularly hear and concentrate on specialist work where experience can grow, not distribute it thinly across the system. The same principle, I think, should apply here. Yes, to answer Jeremy Balfour's point, a specialist service may require greater investment. I don't have those figures. I don't have what the figures might be. But I do believe that when we are legislating for a decision with such profound implications for individuals and families, cost alone cannot be the deciding factor. Safety, expertise and dignity must come first. But what I would say on the cost to Jeremy Balfour is I don't see such a system being set up separately to what health boards have just now. My amendment would also allow assisted dying services to sit as a delegated responsibility within Scotland's integration authorities, our health and social care partnerships, strengthening links with palliative care, social services and community support. And that approach would not only improve coordination but ensure the multidisciplinary expertise is built into the system from the outset. Members may wish to note that my Amendment 250 is supported by the Association of Palliative Care Social Workers, the Royal College of General Practitioners, the Royal College of Nursing, Scottish Association of Social Work and Social Work Scotland. So it's good, credible support from many organisations of the people who would be working in such a system. And I urge members across... Oh, sorry. Ivan McKee.
Thanks, Fulton. I just want to know if you would agree with me that the setting up of the service, the way he's describing in relation to the cost impact of that, might actually be more cost-effective, because otherwise the cost is spread across a whole range of GPs across the country who are having to absorb that into their work and incur costs as a consequence of that, whereas the way he's describing it, people are asking about the cost, that actually might be the actually less expensive way to do it than what the alternative might be.
Yeah, I thank the member for that helpful intervention. It is something that has been raised by some of the organisations that I've just outlined there. That it may indeed, it's unknown just now, but it may indeed be less expensive. Jackie Bailey.
I just wonder whether you've managed to do any costings, or indeed whether the government has.
Always through the chair, Fulton McGregor.
I've been quite open and honest in my answer to Jeremy Balfour. I've not done any costings personally. I have worked with the organisations that I've outlined there to bring this amendment forward, but that hasn't included costings. Just to conclude then, Presiding Officer, I would urge members across the chamber to support this amendment in my name when I move it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on, I wish to make members aware that we have passed the agreed time limit for the debate on this group to finish, and I exercised my power under Rule 9.8.4ac to allow debate on this group to continue beyond the limit in order to avoid the debate being unreasonably curtailed. And I now invite Daniel Johnson to speak to Amendment 292 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The intent here with this amendment was to provide direct accountability for the oversight of data. My concern is that across this bill that we're creating general or corporate responsibilities, but actually some of these areas I think need direct accountability of an office holder. Unfortunately, the drafting of this amendment isn't good enough. So when Jackie Bailey was suggesting that some of the other speakers in this section might be being silly, unfortunately in my case she was quite accurate, and I'll be withdrawing the amendment.
Thank you. I now call Miles Briggs to speak to Amendment 293 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And the proposal for this amendment I brought forward from working with BMA Scotland. And the purpose of this amendment is to establish a formal process for the review of all assisted deaths as they occur through an assisted dying review panel. Now, the panel would review the documentation from each assisted death to ensure that the correct process has been followed and to make recommendations for how the process and service can be improved, including, but not only from a medical perspective. It would ensure that the documentation from each case is brought together centrally and analysed to ensure that compassionate, safe and practical operation of the Act. Review committees are common in other jurisdictions and where assisted dying is provided, and they are included in legislation recently passed in the Isle of Man and in Jersey. The Isle of Man recently confirmed that a compulsory post-death review will be mandated in every case, and reviews will be scrutinised statutory declarations, medical records and compliance with all safeguards put in place. Having a system for routine monitoring and review of individual cases is important for those providing assisted dying and patients who may want to access it, but also for maintaining public trust and confidence in any system established. And it is normal in a healthcare system to discuss cases, to take on best practice and learn from experience. An assisted dying service should, if it comes into legislation, be no different. And it's difficult to see how this could happen if, in the current proposals in the bill, only a copy of the documentation is kept in individual medical records spread across the whole country, with no way of bringing that information together for formal audit or review. And it was suggested at stage 2 that amendments creating a review panel was unnecessary and repetitious, with the role of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit, which sits within that organisation, or the review required by Section 27 of the Bill. However, neither of these proposals provide the information oversight and learning opportunities presented by an assisted death review panel, as I'm proposing. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal, if they are to investigate all sudden, suspicious, accidental or unexplained deaths in Scotland, as is currently the case, none of these would apply to deaths covered by this bill. And evidence from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service at stage 1 that it is likely that the Lord Advocate would require all assisted deaths to be reported to them, and that is and there is no certainty about that at this stage. At stage 1, they also said, the Crown Office also said that they would expect their involvement in investigating cases of assisted dying to be relatively short and unlikely to uncover concerns. Now, Section 27 is a retrospective review, and after... Yes, happy to.
Jamie Hepburn.
It's just for some clarification. I'm just reading on the government notes. I should say I was initially not persuaded of the case for this, but the member is starting to persuade me. But I am unclear on this point. The government notes say, and it's obviously very clear in the amendment, that it does stipulate there are regulation-making powers, but the member's amendment is silent on how those should be taken forward, whether they're negative, affirmative or whatever. Why is that?
Miles Briggs.
So the Section 27 part currently within the bill, which I think is that where the member... I'm trying to work out what part of the bill...
It says here Section 28 sets out regulation-making powers.
Miles Briggs.
Yeah, I haven't got those notes in front of me, so I'm not quite sure in terms of what the government's said in relation to where this would sit. But currently, as things stand, only Section 27 sits as part of the review,
And I think what's important is that we look at expanding that, and that review would only take place every 5 years, I think is my understanding of that. It's not a panel to look towards reviewing the detail of any death that does occur, so I don't think they're compatible. To try to answer the question, I think that the establishment of this panel would also then be reportable to the Chief Medical Officer, which would then be which is where the government, I think, would have that role in that information being made available to ministers and to the wider public as well. So to conclude, I hope the need for the establishment of this panel is important. If this does proceed, to actually understand and have all that information centrally made available, I think it's really important for us to know how the bill would be operating, to make sure that there is consistency, and for our medical professionals to be able to come together to review cases, to discuss cases, and to make sure that everything we have discussed over the number of days now sitting is properly being looked at, best practices being provided, and we're learning as this is taken forward. If we don't have this opportunity to have the panel, like I say, we will not have that. And I urge MSPs to vote for my amendment, and I move Amendment 293 in my name.
Thank you. And I call Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 72 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, President Officer. If I could maybe offer a word of consolation to Daniel Johnson. You haven't really cut your parliamentary teeth until you've had to stand up and speak against your own amendment, because you've only belatedly realised it does the exact opposite of what you intended it to do. I'll speak first to my own amendments. Amendment 74 inserts a new provision into the bill. Its purpose is to give Scottish ministers appropriate powers to ensure that, and I quote, the process for lawful assistance to end life as set out in the bill provisions can be integrated into existing NHS services, and existing legislation regulating the provision of health and medical services can be modified as necessary to integrate lawful assisted dying. The amendment is intended to operate in tandem with Section 20A of the bill, inserted by Jackie Bailey at Stage 2, which helpfully deals with the provision of assistance out with the NHS. Subsection 1 allows arrangements to be made for the provision of an assisted dying service made lawful through the bill. The definition of an assisted dying service reflected in Amendment 73 is closely tied to the provision of assistance under this bill. The power provided to Scottish ministers is by necessity a wide one, given the need for flexibility due to the complexities of Scottish health legislation, while being tailored to the purpose I've already mentioned. In other words, it enables modification across the whole range of existing health legislation to allow for the necessary changes to be made for integrating assisted dying services with the existing services provided under the NHS. I'll take an intervention.
Greer.
I'm very grateful to Mr MacArthur for taking the intervention. I have an instinctive hesitation about providing the government with more Henry VIII powers here, so I'm wondering if he could help me out. I'm wondering what it is that's lacking in Section 31 of the bill, which gives the ancillary provision making powers to the government, and indeed the 1978 Healthcare Act that underpins a lot of this. Both of them already give governments pretty broad powers in this area already. What is it he's envisaging that may be necessary that wouldn't be covered by particularly Section 31 powers here? Because I'm sure he's coming at it from good faith. I'm minded to support him, but I do have that instinctive concern about any provision of more Henry VIII powers to any government.
Liam MacArthur.
I think I would very much share those in a general sense, the concerns that Ross Greer has identified. I think he's right that the provisions in Section 31 are already able to accommodate quite an amount of what I have set out. But I think for the sake of completeness and recognising the breadth of the health legislation, and the need for government to be able to put in place a comprehensive system that addresses all aspects of the delivery of this service, I feel that Amendment 74 and the consequential amendments for it are necessary to allow for that flexible approach. Pam Duncan-Glancy, yes.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the member for taking that intervention, and I've read the detail of the amendment and listened carefully to what the members just said. Can I just ask whether is it the member's vision or understanding that parts of the NHS would side by side. So, for example, that something that is already of an NHS estate could be remodelled to include part of an assisted dying service. Is that kind of the sort of thing that the member is thinking that the regulations would make happen?
Liam MacArthur.
I think what I've always said from the outset is that I envisage this being an opt-in service. I think that's been reflected in some of the changes I've made to the bill actually since its introduction. I've also recognised, though, that this service is going to look different in my part of the world compared to the part of the world that Pam Duncan-Glancy represents. That reflects what happens in the delivery of health and care as things stand, and I think it's the only way of making this work. And therefore, as I'll come on to explain, actually part of the purpose of these amendments is to allow the powers for ministers taken forward in consultation with the sector itself and with individual health boards where appropriate, how they would envisage the delivery of this service. And I think in relation to Fulton McGregor's amendments, which I'll come on to in a second, I think that helps address the issues, which I think quite fairly he's trying to seek to address, particularly in terms of access issues, which he rightly indicates can be problematic in more rural and island areas. The model he describes is one that I know exists in places like Queensland, reflecting the rurality of places like Queensland. Now, that option needs to remain available, but it isn't the only option. And I think, as I say, the approach I'm seeking to take here is to allow ministers, along with the sector and other relevant stakeholders, to develop that structure. So it allows for consultation requirement to ensure stakeholder views inform regulations made under the power. And it applies the affirmative procedure to any such provisions, giving the Scottish Parliament the final say on implementation. I believe that these amendments are the best route to ensure that legally assisted dying can be safely and securely and appropriately delivered through the existing NHS services. I support Jackie Bailey's Amendment 48, which ensures the correct term for social care and social work improvement Scotland is used in section 20A. Likewise, her amendments 66 and 69, which provide that regulations under section 20A1 are subject to the negative procedure, except for the first regulations made under that section, which is subject to affirmative procedure, correcting, I think, an omission after stage 2. Ms Bailey's amendments 240 and 241 adjust section 28 to require ministers to specify in regulations any settings or services where assistance must not be provided out with the NHS, rather than, as the provision stands, for that to be something regulations may include. I think the provision as it stands is more pragmatic and provides flexibility for ministers, but I have no objections to Ms Bailey's amendments in this regard. In terms of Fulton McGregor's amendments, 250 and 309, establishing local services would enable equitable access to dying people wishing to choose this end-of-life option. And the system, as I say, is similar to what is operating in some Australian states. As I said at stage 2, however, it should be for the sector to determine how to manage the assisted dying process within the parameters of the bill. Therefore, my sense is that it would be for the sector to determine whether or not each health board should or should be free to set up a specialist service. In that yes.
Claire Adamson.
It's just a point of clarification, because you said that this would be done within the terms of patients within the NHS. But I'm conscious that some patients, once they go to palliative care or hospice, may actually not be funded through the NHS anymore. Have you given consideration to how that might affect the situation for both the people dealing with that patient or administering assisted dying, or those that might want to indeed not take part in that process, in that situation?
Liam MacArthur.
I think very much that the point that Claire Adamson makes highlights the need to make sure that this is taken forward in consultation with the sector itself. I think it perhaps speaks to the points I was making earlier in response to Ross Greer's question. I think, as I say very helpfully, Jackie Bailey's amendments at stage 2 expressed and set out standards and parameters for the delivery out with the public sector. But I think the amendment that I'm proposing here, or the set of amendments I'm proposing here, provides flexibility.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the member for taking that intervention, and I really appreciate it, and I hope that I'm not testing his or other members' patience in this. The member's amendment does have the potential, I think, and I think he'd probably agree, given some of the changes that might be necessary to create an assisted dying service within the NHS. It does have the potential to make quite big changes to the NHS, structurally, locally, in terms of function, in terms of estate, in terms of quite a lot of areas. Does the member think that is there a parliamentary process attached to these regulations, and does the member think there's enough scrutiny applied to what's being proposed?
Liam MacArthur.
As I said previously, I mean, it's a fair point that Pam Duncan-Glancy makes. It's why it needs to be done sensitively in consultation with those most directly affected, and there would be an option, the route of parliamentary oversight through the regulations then being approved subsequently. So that would give parliamentary oversight, but on the back of the work that would be carried out by ministers in consultation with the sector. I won't reflect on Daniel Johnson's amendments. We'll draw a diplomatic veil over these. I will turn, though, to Miles Briggs' Amendment 293, proposing assisted dying review panel. As I said, at stage 2, I certainly understand the rationale which he set out very clearly, but I'm concerned that such a panel may simply duplicate existing roles and processes which involve detailed reporting requirements throughout, not simply in terms of the 5-year review, but the ongoing annual reviews as well. He, again, I think anticipated what I was going to say in terms of the Crown Office evidence to the Health Committee, pointing to the responsibilities of the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit in this area. And I would also observe the Scottish Government view at stage 2, that this also would play a similar role as that provided for in section 27 of the bill. On that basis, I can support 293, but thank all members for, as Jackie Baillie said, at least offering Parliament a suite of options upon which to reflect and vote later on. So Miles Briggs looking for intervention.
Yep. I thank the member for taking his intervention. I just wondered, it does feel there's a gap then for medical professionals who undertake this work in different parts of the country to then understand how across Scotland learning and reviews are going to actually be implemented. And I just wondered what he then thinks the bill can do to make sure that that is improved, because I don't think section 27 after 5 years is a strong enough panel or review process. And I just wondered in terms of, and it's maybe something the Minister will touch upon in either his note, he's shaking his head, so maybe not. But I think it is important for medical professionals that they would have confidence that reviews are going to take place, and then there's that learning taken forward.
Liam MacArthur.
Look, again, I think that's a very valid point to make and a concern to raise. I think elements not just in terms of that review, but actually in terms of the peer support for medical professionals that are involved in this, for the overall governance, I think that will be important. I would anticipate that being taken forward probably by the professional bodies themselves, subsequent to the Act being put in place. And that's certainly the model that seems to apply in many of these other jurisdictions. But I hope, in conclusion, that Parliament will support the more flexible approach set out in my amendments, which will be pressed to a vote shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr MacArthur, I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Amendment 48 in this group is a necessary technical amendment. I think that's 2 in a row that myself and Jackie Baillie are agreeing on, to assist Jackie Baillie in correcting the name of the Care Inspectorate in section 20A. On Amendment 250, setting up an individual specialist service in each individual health board area would have major financial implications, and given the small numbers of people expected to request an assisted death, particularly in the early years of implementation, it seems likely that many of these local services receive no or very few requests. On Amendment 292, I would note that the setting up of an assisted dying register would have financial implications, although it is recognised the amendment provides that this could be lessened by nominating an existing body to carry out the functions. And on Amendment 293 to Miles Briggs, the only comment that I can make is that the establishment and running of a review panel, as provided for by Amendment 293, would likely have major financial implications. I don't have any comment to make around the timescales. For the remaining amendments in the group, the Scottish Government has no comment other than the technical points to be found in the commentary.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I call Jackie Bailey to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 240.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Could I say for the record that I would never, ever describe Daniel Johnson as silly. That said, I won't detain the Chamber for much longer, as there's no need to add anything substantial to my original comments. But I am struck by the fact that while some of these amendments are technical, and indeed enjoy the support of the Cabinet Secretary, some of the amendments are about operational and delivery issues. It does worry me that we haven't alighted on a clear model of delivery. If the bill does pass, there is clearly more work to do in this regard. And it is the case that good law requires thought from those legislating to consider implementation and delivery if it's to be successful. So it would have been helpful to do more work in this regard, and I'm sure if the bill passes, more work will be done. Presiding Officer, I move Amendment 240.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. The question is that Amendment 240 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 240 in the name of Jackie Bailey is yes, 110, no, 9. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 48 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with amendment 240. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed and amendment 48 is therefore agreed to. I call amendment 241 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with amendment 240. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 241 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 241 is therefore agreed to. We now turn to Group 15, Referendum and Reviews of Act. I call Amendment 112 in the name of Stuart McMillan. Grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, I call on Stuart McMillan to move Amendment 112 and to speak to other amendments of the group. Mr McMillan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm going to focus my comments on Amendment 112 because it is very distinct as compared to the other amendments in the group. So Amendment 112 calls for a referendum on the bill no later than the 7th of November 2028. Now, I considered that date to allow the Section 104 order process to be completed, which, as we know, ordinarily can take up to 18 months, but as we now know, that isn't the case in this bill. Crucially, if the bill is successful next week, it will be incomplete, as the Section 104 order process is still going to be underway. And as such, we are asking the UK Government to act on the wishes of this Parliament. Now, we can't guarantee that those wishes will be delivered accordingly. However, because of the subject matter and also how Liam MacArthur has actually engaged across the Chamber, I genuinely believe that the UK Government would deliver something in accordance with the wishes and the views of this Parliament. So I genuinely believe that they would try to honour the will of this Parliament. However, we are placing that responsibility on the Trust, on that aspect of Trust, and we're also giving them the power to undertake that work under the Section 104 order, and therefore we will have no role thereafter. Ultimately, my amendment today is to allow the Scottish electorate to have their say in what would then be the complete legislation after the Section 104 process is concluded. Now, that way the public would know exactly what this legislation would entail. They'd be able to scrutinise all aspects of it and know what every aspect of the bill involves. Mr Hepburn.
Jimmy Hepburn.
I mean, I've no problem with the notion of putting things to the people per say, but I'm just wondering what the practical effect of this would be, because it says it would be a referendum, but it doesn't say what would happen contingent on the outcome. It doesn't specify that.
Stuart McMillan.
Well, so first of all, also, I mean, the amendment is about the general aspect of actually having the referendum. Now, after that, I mean, clearly this would be something that some further dialogue, some further discussion would clearly need to happen, which I absolutely appreciate and accept. But fundamentally, this is actually about an issue of this importance. And certainly in the eyes of many people, certainly within my constituency, who have been in touch with me, but also men across the country, in the eyes of many folk, this is a very contentious issue, whether it's people who support the legislation and the proposal, or those who are very much against the proposal. Deputy First Minister.
Deputy First Minister.
On that point that Stuart McMillan made, I mean, of course, there's differences of opinion about the core bill. Obviously, in this chamber, I guess what we're all agreed on, though, is that it should be scrutinised in Scotland and made in Scotland. And so, whilst I'm afraid I don't support his amendment in calling for a referendum on assisted dying, I am struck by the argument he's making that a Section 104 essentially allows for no scrutiny at all by any of us in here on the employment rights of our doctors and nurses. Now, putting total trust in the UK government is a pretty hard ask for a nationalist, and so I understand the sentiment that underpins it, whilst I disagree with the ask in terms of a referendum. Does he appreciate where I'm coming from as a fellow nationalist?
Stuart McMillan.
I absolutely do agree with that sentiment. And I mean, the thing I've attempted to do with this, I know Alistair Allen wanted in, and Mr Whittle, I'll take you in a moment. Certainly for me, I did try to kind of keep the constitutional element out of this and focus on the actual process with regards to the Section 104, because I know constituents who have actually been in touch with me, irrespective as to their constitutional view, as to whether they support, obviously, clearly what Deputy First Minister and I want for this Parliament, or those who are against, the aspect of them having a say on the final set of, final bill, if it's passed next week, and also the Section 104, it's for them to actually have that say on that process. I believe that Dr Allen wanted to come in earlier on before Mr Wilson.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving way, and I appreciate the frustration he expresses about the situation with Section 104, which I think is felt across people in different parties. But he mentions that this is a contentious issue. Would he perhaps accept that there are all sorts of contentious issues that this Parliament deals with, but in a representative democracy it's normal, unless it is a rule-changing constitutional issue, for the people's elected representatives to sort them out?
Stuart McMillan.
Well, certainly, as we know, there is no written constitution across these islands. So I would kind of push back gently to Dr Allen that I think the constitution that is in these islands is not really worth the paper it's not written on. So I think the situation that we do have with regards to what I'm proposing today is actually just to allow the public to have their say. Now, let the public decide, because obviously there are a range of amendments that we have sat, this is on day 3, when we're back in again tomorrow. Some amendments have strengthened the bill, other amendments you could argue, or people could argue, actually have weakened elements of the bill. And I think back to it was the amendment section 94 that was discussed earlier on in this process. For me, it's about whatever stage we get to next week, next Tuesday. If this chamber votes to accept and to pass this legislation, it will still be incomplete because of the Section 104 order process. Mr Worthwell, you wanted in.
Brian Whittle.
Thank Mr Macmillan for giving way. I think my comment here is I've been involved in 2 referenda, and neither of the 2 of them have resolved the matter at all, and there's still considerable consternation from the losing sides. So I wonder whether or not, and they move, that tends to move. So I wonder whether or not this is really the best way to resolve such an issue.
Stuart McMillan.
So sadly, the 2 referendums that I have campaigned I have been on the losing side. But I actually think that the concept of referendums is really important. I think they are a very valuable tool for democracy. Just because there is no long history of actually having them across these islands doesn't mean to say that they're not a bad thing. I actually think they are a really valuable tool. When I look at different jurisdictions across the world that actually use them on a more regular basis, whether it's over in the Republic of Ireland, whether it's in states in the US, whether it's in Switzerland, just to name just 3 examples. I think that the whole concept of utilising referendums are actually a really positive opportunity for the public to engage in particular issues. Mr O'Kane.
Paul O'Kane, Mr remotely.
I'm very grateful to Stuart Macmillan for giving way, but he referenced the Republic of Ireland. I mean, he would recognise that that is a constitutional provision in Ireland. So when there are amendments to the Constitution, they're decided upon by referendums. But there is a variance of opinion in the state about whether or not that is actually the best way to decide elements of Constitution, which is obviously very different from here. But also, crucially, there is quite a detailed citizen assembly process that takes place before the development of a referendum, which allows the question to be designed, for example, and the campaigning sides and all of that sort of issue. So would you accept that we don't have that infrastructure here?
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Paul O'Kane certainly for raising those points, and I don't disagree with Mr O'Kane with regards to his comments regarding the Republic of Ireland. But I do think it certainly highlights, and I'll play kind of one constitutional point for a moment, that the fact that some of the limitations of powers that this Parliament actually has. But I'm not considering that to be a hindrance to this opportunity to actually allow the population of Scotland to have their say on what is a really important issue. Okay.
John Mason.
Mr Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. I think he's had a few negative, so I'll give him a positive reaction. Would you agree with me that one of the differences between 2014 and 2016, if I'm correct, with Brexit was that in 2014 the whole population got really engaged, really thought it through, discussed it on the buses, we heard it everywhere, and made an informed choice, which I happen to disagree with, but it did give it a legitimacy, despite what has been said. And whereas Brexit was a very rushed referendum, I would suggest that people hadn't thought through. So would you agree that there needs to be a proper length of time for people to think it through, but we could have confidence in the Scottish population to make a wise decision?
Stuart McMillan.
Mr Mason, I thank you certainly for your comments, and I don't disagree. So certainly the purpose of the amendment and the timescale in the amendment certainly allows for that length of time. As I indicated in my opening comments, because of the Section 104 process, normally taking up to 18 months certainly after the Stage 3 process is finished in the Chamber. So I considered that length of time actually would be advantageous to allow the Section 104 process to finish, and also then for campaign teams to get together, whomever they would be, to then have that opportunity to engage. Because I think it's fair to say that the population are engaged in this issue. I know in terms of the folk who have been in touch with me, and I dare say, certainly in some discussions I've had with colleagues, we have all had hundreds of emails and certainly letters, as well as phone calls coming into the office as well, in addition to whatever is on social media. I'll take you in a wee moment, Mr Briggs. So I think this is an issue that really is engaging many people across the country. And I genuinely feel that if we don't allow the opportunity if we don't actually have the opportunity of a referendum in the future on the bill and also the Section 104 provisions after they pass through Westminster, providing obviously the bill does pass next Tuesday, then I actually think that we potentially could have a negative impact upon many constituents. Mr Briggs.
Can I just say briefly, Mr Briggs, because obviously Mr Macmillan has been extremely generous in taking interventions, but I feel sure that he will be very shortly after Mr Briggs' intervention coming to a conclusion.
Indeed. A very brief question, because when this was defeated at stage 2, I don't think the member could provide costings of how much this would cost to hold a referendum. I wonder if he now has that, now we've reached stage 3.
Stuart Macmillan.
Mr Briggs, no, I didn't, and I purposely didn't do so, because I genuinely feel on an issue like this, when it comes to issues of referenda, that aspect of democracy, that aspect of having that opportunity for the public, I think far outweighs the argument about what the cost would actually be. I know obviously that certainly was one of the considerations in the government notes, certainly for stage 2. But with that, President Officer, I'm happy to conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Macmillan. I now call Audrey Nicholl to speak to Amendment 251 and other amendments in the group. Ms Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Over the course of consideration of Stage 3 amendments, there has been an ongoing interest in how it may impact our palliative care provision, not least our hugely valued hospices. And as colleagues who represent constituencies containing a hospice will know, they are very dependent on charitable giving for approximately 2/3 of their income. So we must therefore tread very carefully in crafting this legislation in order to ensure that the already delicate funding situation for our hospices is in no way weakened. Amendments 251, 253 and 254 replace subsection 1 in section 24A to require formal assessment of the Act's impact on hospices and palliative care every 3 years after it comes into operation. Now, it ensures ongoing monitoring rather than a single discretionary review and requires publication within 6 months, enhancing transparency. And I'll take the
Marie McNair.
Thanks for giving way. Does Audrey Nicholl share my concerns that the evidence clearly shows that there's no favourable impact from assisted dying on funding for palliative care? And we saw that this led to closures of hospices in Canada and the reduction to palliative care funding in other countries that have legalised assisted dying. Therefore, would the member not agree with me that it's definitely false to suggest that assisted dying has had no impact on palliative care funding, and there's certainly clearly anxiety across the hospice movement at the moment?
Audrey Nicholl.
I thank the member for her intervention, and I would agree with the points that she's made in terms of the concerns around the impact of introducing assisted dying legislation on palliative care provision. And I'm aware that research in Europe shows that there has been a clear trend in palliative care funding being devalued. So where care funding has increased, it has not been anything nearly in line with funding in countries that do not, without assisted dying. So, and that has increased significantly, as I say. So I take the point that the member has made and agree with it, and I'll take the intervention.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you for giving way. Thank the member for giving way. I'm just going to repeat actually an intervention I made yesterday, which is that House of Commons 14-month inquiry found no evidence of palliative or end-of-life care deteriorating following the introduction of assisted dying, and they observed that it often had acted as a catalyst for improvement. That was a 14-month inquiry by the House of Commons, so I'm not sure what evidence you're referring to.
Always through the Chair. Audrey Nicholl.
I wouldn't argue with those findings, and I'm sure that evidence is robust, but clearly there is evidence elsewhere that reflects a very different picture. And so the thrust of my amendments is so that we can monitor in an ongoing method the impact of an assisted dying provision on palliative care. So by linking to subsection 2, the assessments covers staffing, operations, funding streams and regulation, and this provides clear evidence on how the Act affects end-of-life care services over time, and it enables policymakers and the public to identify and address any emerging pressures or issues. Now, given the heavy reliance of hospices and palliative care on charitable donations, which can fluctuate depending on factors like cost of living, sustainability of government funding, that is significant. Now, as the anticipated costs of assisted dying have not been settled yet, we must take every precaution to ensure that there is no unintended consequences as a result of passing this bill if it does pass. So I trust colleagues will feel able to support Amendments 251, 253 and 254 as important additions to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Nicholl. I now call Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 252 and other amendments in the group. Mr Kerr.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful actually to Stuart McMillan for starting this group off. He's provided us with a beautifully crafted diversion from the topic, the content of the bill, with his discourse on referendums, which I'm sure will not be the last time we hear the word referendums in this place. But I'd first of all speak on behalf of Douglas Ross, who says, in relation to his Amendment 252, colleagues from across the Chamber will know well the vital contribution that hospices, where we are blessed to have them, make to our communities and to the lives of our constituencies. As is very well documented, hospices are heavily dependent on charitable giving to provide the services we do. Strangely, we tolerate a very high level of dependency on public donations to fund end-of-life care that we simply would not tolerate in any other vital area of healthcare. Knowing then how vital public donations are... Yes?
Section.
I recognise the point that Stephen Kerr is making. However, would he accept that hospices, as valued as they are, and I declare an interest with the fantastic St Andrews Hospice being present in my constituency, they are not the only source of palliative or end-of-life care?
Stephen Kerr.
I don't think Douglas Ross is actually insinuating in his remarks that that is the case, but he's pointing out that some very high quality, as I think Neil Gray has just said, some very high quality end-of-life care is available in hospices, and I specifically mention the local hospice to my home area, which is of course the Strathcarron Hospice, who do an incredible amount of good work, and I personally have had the opportunity to be a beneficiary of the excellent work that they have provided for friends and family. But what Douglas Ross, I think, is saying is that, that we have an inbuilt, whether it's right or wrong, a tolerance to the high level of dependency there is on public donations to fund this end-of-life care. And he's not wrong when he says that this is something that we probably, frankly, would not tolerate in any other area of our healthcare system. Knowing then how vital public donations are to the ongoing viability of the hospice sector, my amendment, this is Douglas Ross speaking, my amendment clarifies that assessments under Section 22A must explicitly consider funding from charitable donations and other non-statutory sources. By including these sources, the review will capture the financial realities of hospices and palliative care providers that rely heavily on public generosity. I therefore trust all members, especially those fortunate enough to represent constituencies including a hospice, will be sure to endorse this amendment today. Now I turn to the amendment in my name, Amendment 298. Because what Group 15 allows us to do is consider something that sits quietly beneath much of this debate, but matters greatly to the people who will live with its consequences, the future of palliative...
Please resume your seat for a second, Mr Kerr. I think I have a point of order from Christine Graham.
I seek your clarification, Deputy Presiding Officer. I've no problem with the member moving an amendment on behalf of Douglas Ross, but is Douglas Ross also voting in this, in which case he should not be represented, because if he's voting online, he is, to all intents and purposes, in this chamber.
That's not.
I thank Ms Graham for her intervention. I think Ms Graham will recall that, in fact, any member can move amendments on part of another member. That has been a long-standing rule of this Parliament. Mr Kerr, please resume.
Yeah, I think that clears that up. So, if I might return to Amendment 298, where I think I was talking about the vital importance of palliative and end-of-life care in Scotland, which hopefully will concentrate our minds again on the issues in Group 15. Amendment 298 asks Scottish ministers to review the funding of palliative and end-of-life care, including the impact that this Act may have on the charitable donations that sustain so many of those services. That request is not made lightly. Across Scotland, hospice and palliative care exists today because of extraordinary generosity. Communities raise money, families organise events, volunteers give their time. Charitable organisations provide services that bring comfort, dignity and compassion to people in the final chapter of their lives. Those services are not peripheral to this debate. They are central to it. For many people, the reassurance that suffering can be managed, that compassionate care will be there at the end of life, is deeply important. The strength of our palliative care system shapes how people think about dignity, choice and the support available to them when they are most vulnerable. I give way to Bob Doris.
I thank Stephen Kerr for giving way. I'm sympathetic to your amendment, Mr Kerr, but I just wanted to give one note of caution. I would hope that as a Parliament, our new Parliament will come together across party political lines to have significant more investment for palliative care, which is absolutely essential in the next Parliament, irrespective of whether this legislation passes or not. So this legislation could or could not pass. I still expect to see a significant increase in palliative care funding from government. Would he agree?
Stephen Kerr.
Bob Doris and I are absolutely at one.
Mr Kerr, could you please resume your seat a second? We have another point of order from Christine Graham.
Yes, I perhaps didn't phrase it appropriately. We have Mr Kerr reading out a speech verbatim for a member who is online and therefore deemed to be present in the chamber. That I can't understand.
Ms Graham, I've already ruled in the matter. I think maybe a refresh of the rules of our Parliament would be useful at this point at 20:48, 17 hours and 52 minutes into our Stage 3 proceedings. Please resume, Mr Kerr.
Absolutely. Well done, Presiding Officer.
Right, okay. Bob Doris and I are completely at one with the need for us to see considerably more investment. And the equality that's been the theme of certainly some of the remarks I've tried to offer in the Stage 3 consideration of amendments. The need for people to have a fair opportunity.
Please resume your seat, Mr Kerr. Point of order, Stu Webber.
I'm trying my best to listen to the remarks and the debate between Mr Doris and Mr Kerr, but all I can get in the background is another member that's gone chuntering away or responding and not accepting the order from your chair. If you could help.
Ms Webber, please resume your seat. I'm not going back on that issue. I think the position is very clear in terms of the rules. I do say to members, though, that obviously we're all tired, but we do have to abide by the rules, which is courtesy and respect of all members, and we do have to listen, Mr Adam, to the member who has the floor, which in the instant case is Mr Kerr. Please resume.
Right. I didn't realise it would be so controversial to offer the words of my colleague in this debate, but I certainly take a lesson from this personally. I think this is the third or fourth time I've agreed with Bob Doris about the need. Is that enough agreement? Have I done enough damage to Bob Doris's career in the SNP? Probably. But these services, those services are not peripheral to this debate. They are central to it, and he is right about that. For many people, as I say, this reassurance is of vital importance, especially at a moment when they are at their most vulnerable. And by the way, that will probably include many of us who are participants in this Parliament right now. Amendment 298 therefore asks a straightforward question. It is, if this Act changes the landscape of end-of-life care, what impact might that have on the services that people rely on today? Some providers have already expressed concern that charitable income could be affected if assisted dying becomes part of the legal framework. If public perception shifts, donations may fall. If that were to happen, the consequences would not fall on institutions, but on patients and families who depend on those services. That possibility deserves careful attention, and my amendment requires Scottish ministers to review the funding of palliative and end-of-life care and to examine whether charitable contributions have been affected by the operation of this Act. Where gaps emerge, it ensures that the government must step in so that these services are not compromised. That is not about replacing the role of charities. It is about recognising the extraordinary contribution they already make and ensuring that their work is not weakened by unintended consequences. Whatever view members take on assisted dying, we should never allow the care we offer to people at the end of life to be diminished. This Parliament has a responsibility to consider not only the principle before us, but the wider consequences of the decisions we make. If the legal landscape around how life may end is altered, we must also be vigilant in protecting the care that supports people as they approach the end of life. And Amendment 298 is about that responsibility. It asks us to look carefully at the real-world effects of this legislation. It safeguards the sustainability of palliative care provision, and it ensures that people who need compassion and support at the end of life are not left vulnerable to unintended consequences. That has to be the watch out for every piece of legislation that we put through this place, but it has to be especially a watchword when it comes to this particular bill. For legislation dealing with matters of life and death, that is a responsibility that we should accept.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call Mike Amara to speak to Amendment 255 and other amendments of the group. Mr Mara.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. My amendments 255, 313 and 314 would require an independent review to be prepared and published on the financial implications of this bill. I lodged versions of these amendments at stage 2 and I move them again now because I do not believe they have had a satisfactory answer, and indeed more information has been provided by the Government in the interim since stage 2. There is far too much, in my view, that we do not know, and clearly we've had discussions this evening about the lack of a model in the bill, and I understand that Parliament is obviously making decisions that will tonight and over previous days and tomorrow that will affect those overall costs. But as Deputy Convener of the Finance and Public Administration Committee, I was involved in scrutinising the original financial memorandum for the bill, and it was found to be full of holes, significant underestimates, and was largely silent on key financial implications of assisted dying. The Royal Pharmaceutical Society in Scotland described the estimated £80 per dose cost to end of life as a huge underestimate of the actual cost. Quote. The Royal College of Nursing said that it was, and I quote, largely silent on the resourcing implications for nursing, despite the bill establishing a key role for registered nurses in the process, end quote. Compared to the numbers of people who had an assisted death in places like Queensland, the financial memorandum appeared to vastly underestimate the number of people who would seek assistance to end their life. There was also no reflection of Scotland's poor health record, which could lead to higher eligibility for assisted dying. Finally, and most critically, I'll come to members in a moment, despite Liam MacArthur's insistence that the bill should be accompanied by improvements in palliative care, and we've heard some discussion on that, to make it a genuine choice for people, there was not a penny in the financial memorandum for palliative care. I'll take the Deputy First Minister first.
Deputy First Minister.
The member talked about scrutinising the financial memorandum, and he's also referenced a lot of healthcare professionals in terms of doctors and nurses. Was there any discussion in terms of the interaction between the UK Government legislating on a Section 104 in terms of the employment protections and how that would affect devolved finances?
Mike Amara.
I can confirm that there wasn't, because there was that particular remedy was not known at the time of the scrutiny of the financial memorandum that we looked at in the Finance Committee. So none of the implications that have developed quite significantly in recent weeks, and we've heard that discussion last night about who knew what, where and when, but frankly, certainly the Finance and Public Administration Committee knew none of it. So it wasn't available to us at that point in time. Mr Mason.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way very much. And I'm on board with him for a lot of this. However, he's not mentioned savings, and that also did come up at the Finance Committee, I think, one of my fears with this bill is that in future, governments, the NHS, could save money by encouraging early deaths. And does he not think that that's something that needs to be looked at as well as extra costs?
Michael Mara.
Well, of course, my colleague Mr Mason, as a member of the committee, did raise these issues at the time. And I understand that there is a real sensitivity in how this issue is discussed, and how that might imply something about motivations on one side of the debate at the other. And I don't take a position on that. But I do understand that Mr Mason has strong feelings in this issue, and I think he's right to put them on the record as part of the concerns that he has at this moment in time. And certainly take Mr
Hepburn.
Mr Maher is quite legitimately laying out his concerns about the financial memorandum, but can I bring him back to his Amendment 255, again, much of which I'm actually quite relaxed about and think there might be merit in, but I am perplexed by the very final part of it, because he mentioned that the review would have to be published and laid before the Scottish Parliament. I think we all understand that. But he didn't mention it then goes on to say, for approval by a resolution of the Parliament. What does that mean?
Sorry, I was just trying to pull the text out there itself. To be laid before the Parliament for scrutiny, in my view, and to maybe taking a vote as to whether that be approved or not as a recommendation on the system. That's my view as it was drafted. So I would say that the Scottish... Yeah, certainly.
Jamie Hepburn.
But just to push that further, how do you approve or disapprove of a review? I'm not quite following that logic.
Well, I think a parliamentary motion could be tabled and a vote taken on it, whether the Parliament would accept the conclusions of the report or not. So I think it's to give some kind of legitimacy to the system and the cost that is taken. But I take Mr Hepburn's points on that. The Scottish Government, if I can make some progress, Scottish Government's response to the revised financial memorandum, which they have made, gives me little confidence that many of the issues that I'm raising have actually been addressed. These were set out in a letter from the Cabinet Secretary for Health to the Health Committee recently on the 26th of February. As the delivery model for the bill remains unclear, the Government is warning us that, and I quote, any discussions around costs are at this point purely illustrative. The Scottish Government disagrees with many of the assumptions being made in the revised financial memorandum, that provision of assisted dying would be absorbed into existing budgets. Not the case, say the Government. That the bill would have minimal cost implications. Not the case, says the Government. That data collection from Public Health Scotland would be minimal and covered by existing budgets. Not the case, again, say the Government. So it's abundantly clear that even with a revised financial memorandum, Parliament really has no idea how much this legislation is going to cost. But that letter from Mr Gray also states that to actually fund the costs will require, and I quote, a degree of reprioritisation, and that negative impacts would be kept to a minimum. What that means is cuts to other parts of our NHS to pay the costs of this service. That's absolutely clear. And so I would also want to point on the issue of there are no mention of assisted dying in the budget for 26-27, nor in the Scottish Spending Review covering the next 3 years. And for the discussion that we've just had, and Mr Doris pointed out that he would like to see more funding for palliative care. Again, there is no additional money for palliative care, the expansion of palliative care in the 26-27 budget. And there is no money earmarked in the Scottish Spending Review for the expansion of palliative care, setting out the spending plans for this Government and the trajectory of spending for the next 2 years for whoever forms the government after the election. And I think that actually the promises that have been made around this, frankly, from both sides of the argument, people who are in favour of assisted dying, saying that we should have enhanced palliative care as an alternative to assisted dying, there is no money, no allocation. For people who are opposed to it, who wish to see more improved palliative care as a true alternative, again, there is no money set out. We should just be honest about that in this process. Fundamentally honest that there is no money for it. Now, future governments can change the position, of course they can, but the spending plans of this government are set and there's no additional money allocated for it. I'll take Audrey Nicholl.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank the member for giving way. I'm just keen to, I suppose, remind the Chamber that the provision of palliative care isn't just the provision of palliative care. It's workforce planning, it's training staff, often in a very specialist role, and there are potentially significant additional costs for colleges, universities and other teaching environments.
Michael Mara.
It's a very fair point that Audrey Nicholl makes, that actually the expansion of that service is not just the direct cost of providing it. That scaling up palliative care is something that would both take time and resource to make sure that we could do it. And I think we share an aspiration in that regard, but we should be considering this this bill on the basis of what is laid in front of us, and there is no money allocated to do any of it. None. So whatever our political views, no one, I think, in this chamber would question the considerable strain that our NHS is under, or the fact that health budgets look set to be very tight in the coming years, given rising demand across Scotland. The Scottish Fiscal Commission are clear on that as well in terms of the trajectory. So we know that this money to pay for this bill will come from those resources. And Parliament would be neglecting its duties without ensuring more robust financial oversight and scrutiny before this legislation is implemented. These amendments I've set out require Parliament and Government to acknowledge the significant costs that will be involved, to put that on the record and approve the spend and say that where that money should come from. I would urge all members to support them. Turning to other amendments in the group briefly, Presiding Officer, I'll be happy to support amendments from Audrey Nicholl, Douglas Ross, Bob Doris, Jackie Baillie, Sue Webber, Jeremy Balfour, Stephen Kerr and Miles Briggs, as they all are variously aimed at increasing data collection, which I think is essential. And I would urge members to vote against Stuart McMillan's idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Marrett. I now call Bob Doris to speak to Amendment 117 and other amendments in the group. Mr Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm not sure the concept of a referendum was actually Stuart McMillan's idea, but I'm sure he'll take the credit for that, Mr Marra. Moving on to the matter in hand, Presiding Officer. No matter our views on assisted dying, we also believe it is essential to include adequate mechanisms by which we can monitor the impacts, effectiveness and safety of this bill should it become law. Given the complexity and nature of the issues involved, it is crucial that we have, at the outset, built-in, baked-in ways of understanding how the Act is working in practice. That's what my Amendment 117 relates to. It adds several important items to the list of matters to be included in the 5-year review of the Act. Much of our debate over the many hours, now 18 hours, has revolved around the registered medical practitioner assessments under Section 6 and the requirements on those set out in Section 7. My amendment will ensure that any review explores the extent to which the requirements set out in Section 7 as amended have been undertaken. It will also ensure the documentation, statements and so on have been compiled in accordance with provisions within the bill. Similarly, the review must consider the information available on assisted dying provided to relevant professionals and those wishing to have an assisted death, again provisions contained within the bill before us. It must also consider the information made available to the Scottish Government by Public Health Scotland. A lot of this relates to amendments we consider in Group 20. This information is essential for any review to be meaningful and for it to be informed. Also, most significantly, the review, with my amendment, must examine the operation and effectiveness of any safeguards contained within the Act. I understand that there has been debate about the effectiveness of safeguards in other jurisdictions and the provisions within other jurisdictions. But if this bill is passed, it's not other jurisdictions we're holding a lens to scrutinise it. It's the bill and the Act that will be enforced in Scotland, and therefore must build in the review properly here in Scotland. We need to ensure that any review here in Scotland collects both robust data on assisted dying, but also examines in some detail and in an informed way whether the various concerns about assisted dying have been realised should the bill become law. My final comment, Presiding Officer, because I didn't want to intervene in Mr Marra, is just to note there has been some increase in palliative care funding in the budget going forward. Not enough, and we need to see far more. I'm not going to take the intervention because no, I'm not going to. It's the only time in this chamber I won't take an intervention, but I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you, Mr Doris. I now call Jackie Bailey to speak to Amendment 118 and other amendments of the group. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm moving Amendment 118 on behalf of Hospice UK. This amendment ensures that the 5-year review of the assisted dying legislation considers the effectiveness of the Code of Practice, which is already set out in Section 22B of the Bill. Now, members will know that the aim of the Code of Practice is to ensure that palliative and end-of-life care services are supported if assisted dying is legalised and that any negative impacts are mitigated and managed. In supporting Amendment 118, we will ensure that as the implementation of assisted dying legislation is being reviewed, the impact on palliative and end-of-life care services is considered. For example, if any changes are needed to staff training for those working within palliative care, or if additional guidance should be provided to hospices. So this amendment is very similar to one that I brought forward at stage 2, but it takes a narrower approach, tied more specifically to the Code of Practice that now forms part of the bill. There are many potential ways to review the effectiveness of the Code of Practice as part of that 5-year review. You could, for example, consult with hospices or palliative care providers on how well the Code of Practice has supported them. Unfortunately, the Scottish Government's comments for this amendment don't acknowledge that narrower approach, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary will do so in his remarks. In fact, they repeat the same kind of comments that were made at stage 2 about requiring data from Public Health Scotland. I would, of course, as gently as possible point out that the key outcome of the Scottish Government's own palliative care strategy is to improve data collection, so this amendment fits neatly with that approach. Oh, I'm happy to take an intervention.
Very briefly, Mr Maher.
I appreciate the member giving way. She'll maybe want to recognise that in the 26-27 budget there's an increase in resource for palliative care, but it's to pay staff more money. The point that I was making in my own speech was that there is no resource to expand capacity in palliative care. And would the member recognise that?
I, of course, recognise that as being true.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call Sue Webber to speak to Amendment 119 and other amendments in the group. Ms Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My Amendment 119 strengthens the statutory review by requiring Scottish ministers to examine, document and report on potential risks, failures and unintended consequences arising from the operation of the Act. It ensures that the review considers clinical safety, the effectiveness of safeguards against coercion or undue influence, the accuracy of eligibility assessments and any differential impacts on vulnerable groups. The amendment proposes transparency, evidence-based evaluation and informed parliamentary scrutiny of how the Act operates in practice. And we've already discussed the importance of recording key outcomes of this bill, and I've already spoken on the side effects of the drugs as well. But we must also record other differentials. Last week, we heard from Tanny Gray-Thompson, who reminded us that the 6-month prognosis can be very different from someone who has economic means and someone who does not. Doctors may consider someone who is homeless or without family support as having a shorter prognosis than someone who has money to spend on treatments and care and a supportive family around them. And we heard earlier in Stage 3 about difficulties around accurate prognosis and the factors that can affect that. And all of these things must be recorded and reported on to ensure transparency and safeguarding. We cannot have a bill that impacts the vulnerable differently. This amendment quite simply ensures that these differentials are recorded and monitored, and therefore we can act if we see homeless, those living in poverty, the disabled being pushed into an assisted death due to circumstances rather than illness. And colleagues, this will happen. Prognosis times for those living in poverty will be different for those not living in poverty. And as I've said before, this is a deeply flawed bill that will impact those already struggling to a greater extent than those who are living with means. It's shocking that we have to consider this, and I have to bring an amendment that does nothing to stop it, but only records it. But that's where we are. So while I remain steadfastly against the bill, I'm doing what I can to raise awareness around some of the issues it contains and in the way we can to protect the most vulnerable in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Webber. I now call Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 297 and other amendments of the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Before I turn to my amendment, and I do intend to be very brief, you'll be glad to hear on this one, I think it would be really helpful if the Cabinet Secretary, when he is making his comments, could give us some kind of indication of the financial cost of this. Because I have been in this Parliament for 10 years, and I have never been in a position where we've been asked to pass legislation where we don't really have any concept of the money. And also, I appreciate this will take time to draw up. Will it be funded in year 2, year 3, year 4, etc.? So I appreciate they are neutral, but whoever forms the government after May will have to fund this. And for us to pass legislation where we have no concept of cost seems to me rather strange. So I wonder whether the Cabinet can do that. Turning to my own amendment, Deputy Presiding Officer, Amendment 297 is important. It introduces a requirement for Scottish ministers to review and report specifically on the interaction between the operation of this Act and suicide prevention. It ensures consideration of overall suicide rates, any cases where individuals might have benefited from alternative interventions, the effectiveness of procedures for identifying and supporting those at risk, and any unintended impacts on mental health or suicide prevention measures, promoting transparency, accountability, and, as always, the protection of vulnerable individuals while assessing the broader public health implications of the Act. This follows closely to the amendment in the previous section of Stephen Kerr that suggests the recording and reporting of the impact of the Act on suicide prevention services. The amendment builds on that. I believe it will help going forward if this is brought into legislation, and I do hope colleagues can support the amendment. Thank you, Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I call Miles Briggs to speak to Amendment 299 and other amendments in the group. Mr Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I think we have quite a good set of amendments in this group. And I've worked with Marie Curie Scotland to bring forward Amendment 299 and also 288, which is in Group 20, which we'll come to tomorrow. One of my concerns around this bill, and from the outset, has been the aspect that no one should choose an assisted death because they can't access care and the support that they need. And as we do go through this whole process, that is one of the hardest aspects of anyone who will vote for this bill, because the number of people dying in Scotland is rising every year. 90% of them need some form of palliative care. That's why I undertook my right to palliative care consultation with Marie Curie to actually look at how this can be improved. Yet it cannot be ignored that our palliative care and end-of-life system is currently in crisis, with significant inequalities in access to care, unmet need, and highly variable quality and distribution across the country. That's... Yes.
First Minister.
Yep. I know that the member has taken a huge interest in palliative care, and I'm very conscious that I think members across the room think that irrespective of what happens with this bill next week, we should really focus on palliative care. What's his vision for the future of palliative care in Scotland?
Miles Briggs.
I thank the member for that, and I'll come on to that. But I wanted to put on record, and I think it's important, because a lot of people who have dedicated their lives and careers to our palliative care service have watched this debate. And I don't want them to think that we have spent any time talking the service down, and I know some will feel that. They are working across our communities to deliver for individuals and families at the most challenging times in their lives. They are doing amazing work, and we should all thank them for what they do day in, day out across our country. But we know that 18,500 people across Scotland each year who die with both significant levels of unaddressed symptoms and concerns around care, and almost 1 in 3 people are not having their palliative care needs met. So to try to answer the Deputy First Minister's question, this debate is taking place ahead of an election. And I think we need to be honest, and all of us from all of our political parties at this election, at what will be needed in the next session. And it comes down to funding models. Now, I was really pleased 10 years ago, working with Chaz after the election, to work and lobby the then Health Secretary, Shona Robson, around match funding, and was really pleased that she announced a 50% funding package for CHAS. Now, one hospice for children across Scotland, but it was a really important step forward in meeting the needs, the funding needs of that sector. Now, we have seen money recently put into the budget, but that is not what the sector asked for. The sector asked for £13.5 million to be able to meet Agenda for Change. It didn't even get that to meet Agenda for Change. So if we can't actually help them match NHS funding, then how can we actually look at the wider unmet need funding? And at home, where people want to die, let's face it, will have additional costs in the future to meet those service needs. So we will need to be honest, and all of us, I hope, in our manifestos, will look towards that. And it's something, whoever is in government after this election, I think will have to seriously look at developing a new funding model. What the hospice sector does shouldn't be brought into the NHS. I'm not advocating that. It would lose so much of its quality and its personalisation for families and individuals across our country. But what it does need is an opportunity to meet that need on its own, to be able to look towards safe funding models which will deliver in each and every one of our communities. And I thank all the members across the chamber who actually undertook local consultation exercise as part of my wider consultation with Marie Curie. To conclude and to touch upon the amendment, Amendment 299 therefore requires a 5-year review to cover Scottish Ministers' assessment of the availability, quality and distribution of palliative care services to people with palliative and end-of-life care needs. Availability of information about accessing palliative care services to such persons, and implications of this Act on palliative care services and the actions Scottish Ministers intend to take in relation to palliative care services as a result of the review. And to conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, regardless of the outcome of this bill, I hope the current debate will provide a catalyst now for further improvements to be made to the quality and availability of palliative care services across our country. I move 299 in my name.
Thank you, Mr Brooks. I now call Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wish to comment on Amendment 112, which proposes that this bill could be the subject of a referendum after royal assent. I realise my friend Stuart McMillan feels strongly about this issue. I also realise he's sitting directly behind me. However, I would want to say that in a representative democracy, I believe that referenda should be reserved for major changes on constitutional questions. That is a tradition that's grown up in Scotland and the UK over the last 60 years, and I'm not making an argument there from tradition. If I thought the tradition was mistaken, I would say so. And indeed, if anything, indeed, the UK has not been responsive enough to demands for constitutional referenda. Some mention has been made in this debate of the Republic of Ireland, and it is true to say that Ireland has referenda on issues of the kind that we are debating here today. But as Mr O'Kane pointed out, that's because these questions involve changing parts of their 1937 constitution, which requires that all constitutional amendments are put to a referendum. So, Presiding Officer, if we lived in ancient Athens or in some cantons of modern Switzerland, it is possible that referenda might form an established part of our day-to-day legislative process. I do genuinely fear, however, for what would happen if we were to set a precedent today of moving to referenda on individual non-constitutional pieces of legislation. Without too many hypothetical examples here, or any hypothetical examples, if we did go down that route, it is very easy to anticipate or imagine situations where some angry majority in the country at some stage decided to whip up online hostility to some minority or other and then seek to press for a referendum about their interests. I can understand the motivations members might have for considering support for Amendment 112, and they've been gone over today. It is tempting to try to find some way of moving this difficult debate into another sphere. However, I think that after many months of public engagement and debate and many days and nights of parliamentary scrutiny, the public do now expect us to make decisions. The public I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way, and I understand the risks of it. But I mean, one of our challenges has been to engage the public more in decision-making. We've tried citizens' assemblies and different things like that. And it was really because there was a referendum in 2014 that people really thought about independence in much more detail. And does he not think that people would think this through at a greater depth if there was a referendum?
I accept the point about the validity of referenda. I merely make the point that I think they work best when we are talking about changing the rules of the game through some major constitutional change. The public rightly hold us to account at elections. Constitutional questions aside, I think that's how representative democracy should work, in my view, and so I respectfully cannot support Mr Macmillan's amendments.
Thank you, Dr Allen. I now call Murdo Fraser.
I pressed my button to speak very briefly on Amendment 112 in the name of Stuart Macmillan. Dr Alistair Allen has made nearly all the points I was going to make, so I'm not going to elaborate much further. I very much agree with him in terms of the tradition we have, the constitutional and political tradition we have, where we only have referendums to deal with major constitutional matters. And I think to start proposing referenda on other matters, social matters or changes in the law, I think potentially opens the door to taking us down a whole different route. We have a tradition, political tradition, in this country in terms of elected members of Parliament, best summed up by the writings of the Irish-born philosopher and English politician Edmund Burke 2 centuries ago, who set out the responsibilities of members of Parliament. We come here not as delegates, but as representatives. Members of Parliament are elected to exercise their judgment once they are elected. We are not here to represent exactly the views of everybody who votes for us and votes to put us in a place of Parliament, and we therefore have to exercise our judgment. And Dr Allen made, I think, a very reasonable point as he was concluding. And we've seen this elsewhere. Sometimes people will vote in referendums, not on the topic actually that's in front of them on the paper, but to cast a judgment on wider issues. For example, whether they think the government of the day is doing a good job or not. And we've seen that in relation to referendums that have taken place elsewhere in Europe and indeed in Ireland, where people vote not on the question before them, but on different matters, which, in my view, is what makes referendums on topics like this very dangerous. And my final point is, yes, happily, I'll give way to Mr Hepburn.
Jimmy Hepburn.
Apologies, I keep pressing my request to speak button rather than the intervention button. I agree with the points that Murdo Fraser and Alistair Allen made, but does not also think there's another challenge? It was the one I made in intervention to Stuart Macmillan earlier. I mean, aside from all these issues, his amendment doesn't even point to the practical effect of the referendum. It doesn't say what would happen next. So what is the point of it, frankly?
Murdo Fraser.
I think Mr Hepburn makes a very reasonable point, and perhaps in winding up, Mr Macmillan can address that particular point, because it does not specify this. But the final point I was going to make is this. People who vote in referendums will sometimes cast a vote for different reasons. They won't always scrutinise in detail the issues before us. And whatever our view on the bill before us today, we are now 18 and a half hours into scrutiny of amendments. Nobody could reasonably argue that members of this Parliament are not doing their job properly in scrutinising this legislation. And I think people who vote for us do so in trusting us to take these decisions on their behalf. And I think we should accept that responsibility and not try and pass the buck to somebody else. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. And I call Keith Brown.
Points just made. It's really in relation to Amendment 112 I was wanting to speak. Just to say, because I've heard this a number of times over recent years, the quotes from Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was giving his point of view about what the responsibilities of a Member of Parliament was. It was a Conservative point of view, vehemently opposed by many other people who thought it was not the right point of view. It wasn't written in tablets of stone. There are many other different versions of what an MP can be. In relation to the amendment, though, my concern is I think Stuart Macmillan has identified a deficit in terms of the democratic deficit here, and I'll explain what I think that is. And I think it would have been advantageous. I'm not normally a huge fan if we had been able to have a civic assembly which had gone into some of the detail that we've gone into over past many hours. But we haven't had that, so we are where we are. But in relation to the point about the Section 104, that's where the deficit arises, in my view. It's not a concern I had coming into this debate. My concerns were more around coercion, but it is a concern of mine now. I think the point raised by the Deputy First Minister is very important in relation to this. And it would be useful if the Cabinet Secretary felt able to intervene to say, if he has any understanding, if what I'm about to say about a Section 104's progress is right, that once it's agreed between the Scottish Government and the UK Government, it is then submitted to the House of Commons and it must be accepted in whole or not accepted at all. That's what I've been told. It may be wrong. I'm just looking for any confirmation. My point is, and the Government's commentary in relation to Stuart Macmillan's amendment is to say that this would be on the statute book if this was passed, this bill was passed before the referendum that Stuart Macmillan talks about took place. I don't know how that can be said, because I don't think we've got a definitive timescale for how long the 104 process would take. The substantive point I want to make, and the doubt that's in my mind, I had a visit from a GP in my constituency who said that she would resign on the day this bill was passed if it did not sufficiently provide for conscientious objection. She felt that in taking the Hippocratic Oath, she was not ever going to be in a position to be involved in this, but she felt she would stop being a general practitioner if this went ahead. If this bill goes ahead, and if we go into a Section 104 process, I know this is going to be contentious, and it's not meant to be for different political parties, but it's not hard to imagine a situation where the governing party in London does badly at the elections in May, that we then have quite a contentious environment in terms of the Constitution subsequent to that, that we also have the situation where assisted dying in Westminster is rejected, but it's approved in Scotland. Now, some people might have good faith and trust that the UK Government will honour that 104 section. I don't. I'm not making a party political point. I just don't. I don't think we can have that confidence. That's the real worry I have in terms of the conscientious objection and the other provisions. And it's one reason why I think it's very right. It's right that Stuart Macmillan has identified this democratic deficit, because once we have done this, we kind of pass it over to somebody else to take responsibility. I think the democratic deficit is, as Alistair Allen says, in terms of representative democracy, in terms of this Parliament and MSPs being able to decide it, not so much in relation to people. I just thought I'd voice those concerns.
Thank you, Mr Brown. I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I will work my way through this group as quickly as possible, starting with Amendment 112 regarding a referendum on what would by then be an act, not a bill, and so in statute, with an expectation it is to be implemented. We also raised technical concerns at stage 2 that are on the record. On Amendment 118, I'm sorry to disappoint Ms Bailey to her request of me in my summary. It may be difficult to show a direct correlation between the Code of Practice and any improvement or decline in support for hospices and providers of palliative and end-of-life care, given that there could be other reasons for such change, including the work being undertaken to deliver on the palliative care strategy, Palliative Care Matters for All, as I discussed earlier in Group 2, or indeed additional funding being provided to hospices, which we are providing, which may have led to improvement regardless of the bill or the Code of Practice. On Amendment 119, the breadth and level of detail specified may have implications for the scale, complexity and resources required to carry out the review, and these factors would need to be considered in implementation. Amendments 255, 313 and 314 provide for an independent review of the financial implications of the implementation and operation of the Act, and for a report on its findings to be laid in front of Parliament. I would reiterate comments from stage 2 that the timing of the review could be challenging, given this is a Members' Bill and so the usual pre-introduction policy development has not occurred. I think an observation Jackie Bailey was referring to in her conclusion to the last group. Should the bill pass, there would need to be a substantial implementation period and consultation with relevant stakeholders to develop the policy framework, during which the Scottish Government would undertake its own assessment of the financial impact of the bill. This review, therefore, could result in duplication and would be curtailed by decisions needing to be made on implementation, as well as, of course, requiring resource for such a review. I'm also concerned that it's not clear what the effect of Mr Mara's suggestion regarding a resolution of Parliament would be. I give way to Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. And we've had, rightly, a lot of discussion about the absolute essential necessity to ensure that palliative care is supported and funded. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, is he in a position to also guarantee that there would be no cuts to other areas within, for example, his portfolio, such as the social care budget, or the budget available to IJBs, or the budget available for CAMS and mental health services, if this bill were to be implemented?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I've put on the record the position of the Government in terms of choices having to be made in terms of budgets for this bill. I would put on the record that the funding of palliative care is the responsibility of integrated joint boards and not directly funded by the Scottish Government. I give way to Edward Mountain. I think this will need to be the last in this group.
Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, I'm very grateful for you giving way. In fact, I raised this issue in the Parliament the other day, where you'd written to the committee before this Stage 3 debate saying that there was no extra funding and that the funding would have to come from within the existing National Health Budget. Could you just confirm that remains the case and what your estimate would be on that costing?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have no estimate of costing. This is a member's bill as opposed to a government bill, and so the usual controls and strictures that come with a government leading a bill are not the same. So it's impossible for me to say until the conclusion of the bill, not least because we're voting on amendments that could have financial implications, to say what the current financial cost is. On Amendment 297, it may not be possible to provide the required information on the impact of the operation of the Act on suicide prevention and broader mental health outcomes. While it would certainly be possible to provide statistics as to the numbers of assisted deaths that have taken place and the suicide rate in Scotland over the same period, it would likely be difficult to provide any definitive view on whether the former had any direct causation on the latter. The same difficulties arise for other requirements under this amendment, and if it were possible to provide the data being asked for, this would require significant investment to set up the processes to gather this data. I also appreciate the absolute sensitivities of these subjects, so I'd ask that members be careful not to conflate suicide and assisted death. And I would point to the Scottish Government's suicide prevention strategy that sets out our vision to reduce suicide deaths here in Scotland. On Amendment 298, it should be noted that the additional information required in the report would be reliant on data from Public Health Scotland, which does not currently collect data in the manner requested. This is in large part because, following the introduction of the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Act 2014, it became the responsibility of integration joint boards to plan and resource adult palliative care services for their area, including hospice services based on local need, a point I just put on the record in response to Pam Duncan-Glancy. In addition, palliative care is delivered across a wide variety of health and social care services, such as care at home services, hospices, care homes and hospitals. Therefore, new processes and investment would need to be included to support this level of data collection, development and reporting. The same considerations apply for Amendment 299. Presiding Officer, regardless of whether or not this bill passes, the Scottish Government is committed, through our palliative care strategy, to improving the way data is recorded and reported to support better service planning and monitoring. For the remaining amendments in this group, the Scottish Government has no comment other than the technical points to be found in the commentary, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Lee MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Stuart McMillan's Amendment 112, I find myself in wholehearted agreement with my fellow Islander, Dr Alistair Allen, in terms of the concerns he's raised. I think if this bill is passed by Parliament, it will be after widespread consultation with the public, extensive engagement both with the public and stakeholders, and through extensive scrutiny and debate and amendment. By way of reassurance to Mr McMillan, polling consistently shows overwhelming public support across Scotland for a change in the law of this type, including a majority in every constituency and region of the country. John Curtis's 2025 Scottish Social Attitude Survey found 81% of people are in favour of assisted dying for someone with a terminal illness. And the National Centre for Social Research has analysed attitudes towards assisted dying across the UK, including in Scotland, and concluded that the picture in assisted dying is, quote, one of remarkable stability and near consensus in public attitudes. But ultimately, and I think this was the point that Keith Brown, Alistair Allen and Murdo Fraser all made, that it is for this Parliament to decide on the basis of the remit we have as elected representatives. My proposals received the highest number of responses for a consultation on Members' Bill, and scrutiny has been robust, as I say. Turning to Amendments 251, 253 and 254 in the name of Audrey Nicholl, I think these are mostly constructive and proportionate amendments to Section 22A, requiring Scottish ministers to assess and report on the impact of the Act on palliative and end-of-life care services. I reiterate the point that Rona Mackay made in relation to the House of Commons Health Committee's report after an extensive inquiry into assisted dying that showed no detrimental impact on palliative care, and in either cases the reverse. But I have absolutely no principled objection to the amendments in Audrey Nicholl's name. I'm not persuaded, however, that Douglas Ross's Amendment 252, providing that the assessment under 22A must include information on the impact of funding on charitable donations and other non-statutory resources. I don't think that's necessary, and partly for the reasons that the Cabinet Secretary highlighted in his earlier intervention. On Michael Mara's Amendment 255, I reiterate the comments I made when the same amendment was brought at stage 2, noting the Government's view on the deliverability challenges, and as the Cabinet Secretary has noted, should the bill pass, there would need to be a substantial implementation period and consultation with relevant stakeholders to develop the policy framework for the bill, during which the Scottish Government would undertake its own assessment of the financial impact of the bill. And I'll take a brief intervention from Michael Mara.
Michael Mara. I appreciate the member giving way. I will be brief. What was his reaction to the letter that came subsequent to stage 2 from the Cabinet Secretary that clearly set out that putting this bill in place will require cuts to other NHS services?
Ian MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I don't think, in fairness, that was what the Cabinet Secretary said. I think it has been phrased in the way that Michael Mara wants to phrase it. I think I would point to the very sensible contribution made by Miles Briggs on this, that we are legislators. We are going into an election. It's up to parties across this chamber and those that aspire to be here to set out in their manifestos their commitments to palliative and other care. I think I would also observe that a part of the process of the debate around this issue has shone a light on palliative care that wasn't there prior to the introduction of this bill. And I very much welcome that and hope that that will continue. But the review proposed by Mr Mara could result in duplication, as the Cabinet Secretary said, while bringing with it its own financial implications. With regards to Amendments 313 and 314, I am not in favour of tying the commencement of the Act's substantive provisions to the production and approval by Parliament of a report. I note also that Amendments 117, 118 and 119 in the names of Bob Doris, Jackie Bailey and Sue Webber respectively all set out information to be included in the review of the operation of the Act. While I believe much of the information would be captured in the review as provided for in the bill, I am prepared to accept 117 and 118. However, I don't consider Amendment 119 proportionate, helpful or necessary. In relation to Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 297, which would require information on the impact of the Act on suicide prevention and broader mental health outcomes to be included in the review, I do not believe this reflects the purpose of what we are debating today. This bill is distinct from suicide prevention policy. As I said in the debate at stage 1, organisations working in suicide prevention have also emphasised the importance of maintaining a clear distinction. Mental health charities, SANE, along with suicide prevention leaders in jurisdictions including Australia, have stated that assisted dying should not be described as suicide and have urged governments, the media and politicians to keep these distinctions separate. On Stephen Kerr's Amendment 298 and Miles Briggs' Amendment 299, which require information on palliative and end-of-life services to be included in the review of the operation of the Act, I have and will continue to champion the importance of palliative care. And while I note the Scottish Government's comments on the feasibility of such an assessment, I certainly understand why MSPs may wish to see this included in the review and don't oppose its inclusion, albeit there may be questions about the extent to which such information will be available in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Stuart McMillan to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 112.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, just on Liam MacArthur's points at the end there. Now, I didn't highlight what I'm getting in my inbox and also with my constituents. Mr MacArthur clearly also highlighted a range of figures with regards to the public support. I know certainly from my office it's a 4-to-1 ratio of people who are against this legislation. But in my office, that's what I am getting. But on social media, it's the exact opposite. So I purposely stayed away from what I am receiving because I wanted to focus on the other aspect of why I put forward that particular amendment. Secondly, on Murdo Fraser's point, yes, we are representatives. And I know, when I put this amendment forward, I've got constituents on both sides who asked me to put forward this particular amendment. So I am content that I have done my job for my constituents on both sides of the debate. I actually believe it is the right thing to do anyway, but I have done that because that's what both sides of the debate and my constituency asked me to do. Also, the point regarding voting, everyone, the electorate vote for a wide variety of reasons, whether it's an election or in a referendum. I would not see this as something very much different from that. And Mr Fraser also spoke about traditions. This Parliament can create its own traditions, and I'll put that to Dr Allen as well, with regards to his comments earlier. So we can create our own traditions in how we actually want to have our democracy. I'm about to speak about you. Well, I'll let you go first.
Jamie Hepburn.
I mean, I have no objection to the notion of creating our own traditions as well, but I would hope if we did them, they'd be for a purpose, and I'm still struggling to understand what the legal purpose of this referendum would be, because it's not specified. Could have a referendum to no practical effect. I don't understand what the point of that would be.
Stuart McMillan.
Mr Hepburn, if my understanding as to the position that you're taking is that if the referendum were to fail, kind of what would happen? I think Mr Hepburn kind of touched upon that or alluded to that earlier on in your comments. That was what I took from your earlier point. The referendum may pass, and then it is totally enacted. If the referendum wasn't successful, there would then have to be some other consideration. Now, as Mr Hepburn will be... hold on, let me finish my point. As Mr Hepburn will be very much aware, this Parliament actually has struck down legislation in the past with the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act. That may or may not be something that would be considered. Sure.
Jamie Hepburn.
I say this respectfully to my friend, Mr McMillan. I do usually get on with one another, I should say, for the benefit of the Chamber. He's saying what would happen, but with respect, his amendment does not say that. It doesn't specify anything at all. So, with the best will in the world, he's speculating as to what might happen. We're making law here. It should specify what should happen, and his amendment does not.
Stuart McMillan.
As I did indicate earlier on, the purpose of this was about the actual consideration to have the referendum in the first place. Clearly, when referendums do happen, as we know in this Parliament, there are a range of other activities that do need to be put in place to make it happen. So certainly from my consideration on this, other activity clearly would have to happen after this if it were to pass. Finally, with regards to the points of Keith Brown, I don't disagree at all with regards to the democratic deficit regarding the Section 104 order, and also the Deputy First Minister touched upon that earlier on. I genuinely do think that if the bill does pass next week, that the element of the UK Government acting in good faith to actually deliver the situation, the wishes of this Parliament, I do think that actually that would happen. However, we are taking that on trust. Mr. Brown.
Can I thank Stuart McMillan, also my friend, for taking intervention. Can I say that I don't know whether he's aware, he may well be aware in relation to this. I did try to seek this information from the Government, but Section 104 is drafted by the UK Government. It can't be amended by MPs or Lords. There's no definite timescale for how long the process would take, which is why I was a bit bemused by the idea the government has said this will be on the statute. It will be on the statute book by the time of the referendum you propose, but you can't say whether it's going to be enacted because we don't know the outcome of the Section 104. And my point is, and it's really for those proposing this bill, at least to concede it's not their fault, to concede that it's a very uncertain thing to do, to leave vital provisions of this bill in the hands of somebody else and take it on trust. And I'm not just making a party political. I don't have that same level of trust as apparently Stuart McMillan does, that the UK government in all circumstances will follow through. I've not been party to the intergovernmental discussions, of course, but I do have a real concern about that.
Stuart McMillan.
So, I mean, Mr Brown is right. I mean, there is the Section 104 process. There is no scrutiny function afterwards. So this Parliament cannot change anything after that process. As I did indicate yesterday, on a couple of occasions, traditionally the Section 104 order process would take up to about 18 months after the Stage 3 is passed in this Parliament. That clearly is not the case in this particular regard. So with that, Presiding Officer, I am now going to press the amendment. I do suspect it's clearly not going to pass, but I'm still going to press it nonetheless because I'm going to press it. Genuinely, I know there's some folk laughing, but genuinely, I'm standing here to represent my constituents.
Let's hear Mr McMillan.
I've got constituents on both sides of this particular debate who want a referendum on this issue. So putting forward this amendment is to represent my constituents, and I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 112 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Edward Mountain for a point of order.
Sorry, Presiding Officer, my voting app wouldn't connect, and bizarrely enough, I would have abstained.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 112 in the name of Stuart McMillan is yes 7, no 112. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment... point of order, Christine Graham.
I'm sorry, I just feel we'll run out of time before I get this off my chest. As you know, I sent to the presiding officers what I intended to raise. I've had the reply, but if you forgive me saying the reply is erroneous, and I'll explain why. The point is, Stephen Kerr delivered verbatim, and he told us so, a speech for Douglas Ross. In other words, he stood in Douglas Ross's shoes and delivered a speech at the same time as Mr Ross was online and voting. Therefore, it was perfectly capable for Mr Ross to come online, come on camera and deliver that speech. The practice is you require those speaking remotely to be on camera. Now, it seems to me there's a novel practice developing here where you give a proxy speech to another member while you're still online and voting, therefore you don't need to be on camera. The reply I got back referred, when I gave you notice, presiding officers, to Rule 9.10.14, but that refers to the fact that anyone may move an amendment on behalf of anyone, even if they're in the chamber, they don't move it, anyone else can get up. This is not about moving an amendment. This is about delivering a speech, word for word, for somebody else who's actually online. So there's questions that arise here. First of all, why did Douglas Ross not deliver his speech on camera? It was obviously pre-arranged that Mr Kerr would deliver it for him. Secondly, why did Douglas Ross not intervene when I raised these points, if he is online and heard what I was saying? And it seriously raises this question, is Douglas Ross actually online and is Douglas Ross actually voting?
Thank you, Ms Graham. I am aware that this point has already been addressed by the Deputy Presiding Officer. It is the case that Rule 9.10.4 provides that where a member is given notice of an amendment doesn't move it, any other member present may do so. And the rule has no bearing on the ability of any member otherwise to participate in or vote on proceedings. Now, we will continue with our proceedings this evening. I call Amendment 242 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated, with Amendment 18. Is it? Christine Graham.
I'm not so foolish, presiding officer, to challenge the chair, but from this I now understand that I may be at home and voting and deliver a proxy speech to someone else to make on my behalf. I take it that's now an accepted practice in this chamber. I see Mr Ross is now appearing.
I have already ruled on this matter and I would prefer that we moved on to our next item of business. I take Douglas Ross for a point of order.
I'm grateful, presiding officer, and to confirm to Christine Graham, I am following proceedings. I am voting from home, where I travelled for 3.5 hours today to spend a small amount of time with my 7-year-old son, who turned 7 today and hoped to see his father on his birthday. I will leave Murray at approximately 5 a.m. tomorrow morning to be in the chamber with other members, but I have been following proceedings. I'm grateful to Stephen Kerr for contributing on my behalf today, and I'm also grateful that we as a family-friendly parliament have the ability to be able to spend some time with our children when it is very special to them that their parents are with them.
Thank you. That is not a point of order, but it is on the record. We will move on to our next point in the proceedings. I call Amendment 242 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 18. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not move, and if it's helpful, presiding officer, 243, the next one, not moving either.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. 242 is not moved. Amendment 243 in the name of Jeremy Balfour is not moved. I call Amendment 49 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 18. Jackie Bailey to move or not move? Thank you. The question is that Amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 244 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 18. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not move, and again, if it's helpful, 245 and 246, not moving either.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. Amendment 245 is not moved. Mr Balfour, can you confirm whether or not you were intending to move Amendment 246?
No, Convener.
Thank you.
No, not moving.
Thank you. Amendment 246 is not moved. I call Amendment 50 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with Amendment 144. Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Kenneth Gibson for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. Your vote will be recorded. I call Davy Russell for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect either. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Russell. The result of the vote on amendment number 50 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 49, no 73. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 51 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with amendment 144. Liam MacArthur, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 51 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 73, no 48. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Thank you. I hope that we perhaps could have begun to debate to the next group, but as we are so close to 10 o'clock, I think we will end consideration of amendments for today at that point. There are no questions to be put as a result of today's business. Therefore, that concludes decision time, and I close this meeting.